Adams State College. Great stories begin here.
Welcome everyone, good evening, and thank you for coming tonight to the next Adams State College faculty lecture. Tonight it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Jenna Neilsen, assistant professor in our theater department. This semester, Ms. Neilsen started a comedy improv troupe for the first time, and she has with her tonight some of the guinea pigs. Is that what you're calling yourself?
It's the official
From the comedy improv. See, I can do a little bit. From the comedy improv troupe, she assures me comedy improv is not the same as stand-up, so don't expect her to stand up here and make jokes. I don't exactly know what to expect, but she and her assistants are going to tell us all at the same time. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Jenna Neilsen and her students.
Good evening. A couple of weeks ago, when I decided to do this lecture and sent the information off to those that be so that they could publicize it, I immediately started getting feedback. And the very first thing I heard was, you can train to be an improv person? Really? You don't just stand up and do it? And so hopefully tonight I can dispel some of those rumors that either you are funny or you aren't. Okay? Just like if I were to go to a music concert here on campus, I wouldn't look at the pianist and say, well, I've plumbed a couple keys and I'm no good at that. You know, so I could never play what they're playing. They took years and years to study to do it. The same thing is true of good improvisers. They spend years and years practicing their craft. So tonight we're going to talk about four main areas that have to do with the style of improv that I've had the pleasure of studying. Before I do that, just to give you a little bit of information about myself and why I'm credible to talk about this subject. I did do improv in undergraduate, as these guys are doing. I then did some more improv at the graduate level. A couple of summers ago, I had a wonderful opportunity to go to Maine and to study with a gentleman by the name of Keith Johnston. Keith Johnston is one of probably 3 or 4 of the top improv teachers in the world, not just the nation, but in the world. He is recognized. People outside of the improv community have no idea who he is, but within the improv community, people recognize his name. And whether people love his style or hate his style, they certainly recognize his style. So the first question, of course, is, who is this guy? Who is Keith Johnston? First, he's an author. He has written 2 pivotal works on improvisation, Impro, which was published in the late 70s, and Impro for Storytellers, which expounds upon Impro. In fact, despite the fact that I read Impro for the first time in my graduate school, and it literally changed my view of both theater and teaching, he, in our workshop, told us that he thinks that Impro is crap. Mainly because he thinks Impro for Storytellers is so much better. But so he has those 2 books to his name. He also is the founder of the Loose Moose Theater Company. It's in Calgary. It has trained some of the most famous improv artists out there. Okay, so if you think of Second City in Chicago, the Loose Moose is kind of the Canadian version thereof. He also developed, and this guy is really smart because he also patented a game called theater sports, which means that if you go to see a theater sports show, it is, Keith Johnston's getting a kickback from that, which was really smart. But it's a competitive-based improv system, so you have teams and they're competing. It's very similar to an athletic event, and that's what he based it on. There are, what are the people in the striped shirts? Referees. There are referees. Okay. There are judges. It's a really exciting, fun time. And it spawned, the idea of theater sports spawned all sorts of other groups, including the group that founded Whose Line Is It Anyway in London, which then, of course, moved here to the States. and there's an LA-based Whose Line Is It Anyway? Okay, so he's a pretty important guy. Today, we're going to talk about 4 areas of Johnstone's improvisation, okay? Or as I call them, principles of his improv. Spontaneity, storytelling, agreement, and status. So we're going to start with spontaneity. And this is going to require all of you to become improvisers for just a few moments. But don't worry, we're going to do it all together. No one will ever know that you tried, okay? So what you're going to do, and my folks here are going to stand up so that it can help model. You don't have to stand up, though if you feel the urge, you can. Okay? And first thing, and bear with me because it does get more complicated. Okay, this first one is really quite pedantic. You're going to point at something and call it what it is. Okay? So Brittany, why don't you show us what that is?
Ceiling, floor, desk, projector, light, floor, wall.
Okay, just as simple as that. Okay, we'll go at that for about 30 seconds, and then I'll call a halt. Okay, so go ahead, point at things and call them what they are.
Jenna.
Chair, desk, pipe, mouse, computer, Jenna, scarf, camera,
Jen.
audience, desk, screen, projector. Okay, good. Okay, so not too difficult, right? Kind of enjoyable. Next, it gets a little bit trickier. What we're going to do is we're going to point at something, say nothing, then point at the next thing and call it what we just pointed at. Okay? I know, this is taxing. All right, so Becca, why don't you show us how we do that?
Wall, light, popcorn, periodic table, wall, shirt, scarf, light.
Okay, just like that. Okay, so you're going to point at something, say nothing, point at the next thing, and call it what you just pointed at. And again, we'll do that for just a couple seconds, and then I'll call a halt to it too. Okay, good. Excellent work. Okay, so remember how that was like as we move on to the third part of our spontaneity game, and that is to point at something and call it anything but what it is. Okay? It can be anything, and guess what, Chris? This is all you. So go ahead and show us pointing at something and calling it anything but what it is.
Mat, shirt, ceiling, chair.
Okay, excellent. It can be anything. So it can be something in the room. That's fine. It can also be a penguin, crocodile, Inspector Gadget. Okay, anything but what it is. Go ahead and do that, and we'll talk about it. Okay, excellent, and look at that, you guys are all one step closer to being professional improvisers. Okay. So what often happens, you guys can go ahead and have a seat. What often happens for people, and you may or may not have found this yourself, is the first one, of course, is very easy, right? It's very easy. We're trained from the time we can have kindergarteners, right, who can point at something and identify what it is. That's what our school system teaches us. The second one tends to be a little bit more difficult, right? We have to use our short-term memory, but it's not terribly difficult because, again, our society, and especially our education, our primary education anyhow, reinforces that idea that there is a right answer, right? If I point at this, and that I point at this, if I call it anything but Michael, I'm wrong, right? I mean, there is a right answer, and that feels good, right? It's good to know that I'm either right or I'm wrong. The third one, people tend to have trouble. Okay, what happens is the first ones we go really strongly, and then we start to falter. And you might have found that, right? You start to get hung up. You can't think of anything. We know literally millions of words, right? I mean, or at least thousands, depending on who you are, I guess. Right? There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to point at lots of things and call them anything, right? But we start to block ourselves because we don't have parameters. So we start to give ourselves parameters. I can't repeat anything, though I never said you couldn't repeat, right? I can't put things in categories, right? So if I call this a penguin and I call that a crocodile, oh no, that's two animals. I can't have a third animal or I'm going to look unoriginal, right? Uncreative, even though that was never a parameter, right? And certainly, as I've told my students, it can be really funny to say, I've got here a rock, a rock, a rock, another rock, a round rock, a rock, right? So there's nothing that says that you can't repeat, but we condition ourselves that we can't. And all of this ties into the idea of spontaneity. Okay? So when you look up spontaneity, it says the act of being spontaneous. So when you look up spontaneous, it gives you all of these different definitions. Proceeding from natural feeling or native tendency without external constraint. Arising from a momentary impulse. Controlled and directed internally or self-acting. Produced without being planted or without human labor. Indigenous. Developing or occurring without apparent external influence, force, cause, or treatment. And finally, not apparently contrived or manipulated, but natural. So why is this game so hard? It's hard because we're trained out of doing it. We all naturally have the ability to open our mouths and allow anything to come out. But in society, that gets us into trouble, right? As well it should. And what you're going to hear over and over and over again tonight is that a lot of improv training is just that. It's breaking the social conditioning we've had that keeps us nice and safe, but also keeps us boring. Okay? It keeps us safe in our real world, and we want that. It keeps us boring on the outside when we're on stage. Okay, so we're trained out of this idea of being spontaneous, but it is the first and most essential skill for an improviser. To be able to open our mouths and without self-judgment to say whatever it is that comes out. So the very first thing we spend time on when we're training to be improvisers, and we come back to it again and again and again, is exemplified by this game. This idea of, can I point to something and without judging, gosh, this is going to sound really stupid, but the first thing that came to me was crab. What does that say about me, right? Oh no, people are thinking I'm thinking about crabs. Oh no, right? But instead, just, where is that going to take me, right? So the first rule of improvisation is the idea of spontaneity. Once we have that spontaneity, that idea that we can open our mouths and say what comes out without fearing that someone's going to judge us, then we move on to the second, which is storytelling. The heart of all drama, whether it's improvised or it's scripted, is being changed. Okay, if we come to a show and we watch a man and he drinks his coffee and he reads his newspaper, then he gets up and because he drank coffee, he brushes his teeth, and then he goes to work and he comes home and he goes to bed, we all feel really cheated, right? Where is the story? Where is the drama? And what we want is for something to be changed. So at the absolute foundation of Johnstone's improvisation, it's the idea of storytelling. Okay? At the heart of bad improvisation is our desire not to be changed, which of course we all learn and is good for us in common society. Okay? In society, we don't want to show a great deal of emotional transformation. Okay? That gets us into trouble. In improv, it's exactly the opposite. Okay? So we have to learn, how do we allow ourselves to be changed on stage? Okay? Bad improv. I shot you. Good thing you were firing blanks. Okay? Nobody had to be changed. But good improv, I shot you. Oh, it really hurts, right? Because then the story can go somewhere. So we have to get out of the way of not being changed. Okay, it's important in our everyday lives. We don't want to be emotionally changed, but a good story, a good drama, does just that. So a good story is made up of three components. A platform, a problem, and finally, reincorporation. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of those. A platform. You could also look at this as the stasis. Okay? This is when everything that's happening is ordinary. Okay, so we go back to that gentleman, and he does. He wakes up, he drinks his coffee, he reads his newspaper. This establishes for us who he is. Right? What his routine is. We like that. Most stories start with some sort of stasis. Okay? Now the stasis doesn't have to be ordinary or boring. Okay? All of you have probably seen an Indiana Jones film. Right? An Indiana Jones film is not an Indiana Jones film if it does not start with him being in some sort of catastrophic calamity. Right? I mean, he is running for his life. Right? That is the stasis of an Indiana Jones film. Because we know he's going to run for his life, he's going to escape, and then he's going to go back to his boring teacher world, right? Where he's a professor and everything is normal. That's the stasis. Okay? And we know that until that happens, the story isn't really beginning. But what it does for us is it builds who these people are. We like stasis. Okay? We need to establish a routine before we can break the routine. Which leads us then, of course, to the problem, or the breaking of that routine. There's sometimes tilts, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but basically all it is the hero has to get in trouble. Okay? A story doesn't go anywhere until the hero gets in trouble. Something has to happen to make the character change. Okay? He doesn't just suffer, though. I mean, we don't just want to see somebody who just has bad luck befall him. He has to be in pursuit of a goal, right? And then, as Johnstone likes to say, once you have him suffering a problem, then two things can happen. Either it can be solved, or you can get him into more trouble, right? But that's going to happen. Okay, we have to have a platform. It has to be broken by a problem, which are sometimes tilts. Tilts are a convenient way of doing this, and so it's one of the first ways I teach students, I teach other improvisers of how to break a stasis, and that's with a tilt. A tilt is one character changing the relationship he or she has with the other character. Okay? It's bringing in a new or an unexpected piece of information. So for example, I have a scene between a husband and a wife. Okay? They're getting ready for bed. Everything is going perfectly normal. They have done this literally hundreds of times before, right? They brush their teeth, they get into bed, she hands him his book or his newspaper, everything is perfectly stasis, and then we introduce a tilt. It could be, I've been having an affair. Well, okay, right? Change, and suddenly the stasis is broken. It could be, I think it's finally time to consummate our relationship. Right! Hey, we certainly have a very different scene going from the first. Okay, it can be, you hear that scraping noise? It seems to be coming from underneath our bed, right? It can be anything, but it's something that changes the relationship. It changes what is happening. Tilts can be either strong or they can be weak. We, of course, as improvisers, want to train ourselves to choose strong choices, right? Not that they're good or they're bad, but they are weak or they're strong. A strong tilt presents a mystery to the audience that needs to be solved. Okay? And in so doing, of course, presents a mystery to the other improviser that needs to be solved. A weak tilt alters the relationship, but it presents no mystery. Okay? So, for example, a waiter tries to open a bottle, he has a lot of trouble, he hands it to somebody, they get it open for him. Okay, so their relationship has changed, right? He's now grateful to that person where he wasn't before, but it's not very interesting, and it certainly doesn't give our audience anything in terms of a mystery to be solved. As opposed to, a waiter tries to open a bottle, someone offers to help him open it if he sells them his soul. Right? Suddenly, we as an audience have all sorts of questions, right? Why is this bottle worth his soul? Right? I want to know. I'm interested. Why would the devil want his soul? Will he do it or won't he do it? Right? So you want to work towards strong tilts versus weak tilts as an improviser. One more thing about that is that justification plays into tilts. Just about, and really into all of improvisation, just about any offer is a good one. Sometimes they just need more justification than others, right? Anything can happen in any story so long as it's properly justified, right? If I ask for a location and you tell me a living room, and then I ask for an activity and you tell me digging, okay? I now get to justify why in the world am I digging in my living room, right? I can't just dig in my living room, but I could certainly dig in my living room to hide a body, right? Or I could dig in my living room to find the buried treasure. Or my mother told me that underneath one of these floorboards is something, right? And if I just find which one it is. So anything can be justified. Sometimes it just takes more work. And then finally, we move on to reincorporation. And reincorporation is basically the idea of bringing something from the beginning of the story and tying it in. It's what makes us look at a story and say, oh, that's the end. That makes sense. Okay? It's what tells us that it seems like, to us as the audience, it was all planned from the beginning, which of course it wasn't, right? Or it wouldn't be improv. But it's what makes us feel like they put that dagger in the very beginning of the story because it was going to come up at the very end. Right? Of course, good improvisers give themselves lots of details in the beginning of the story so that they can reincorporate at the end. Not that they know the dagger is going to be used in the final moment, but if they didn't give it to themselves in the beginning, they couldn't reincorporate it at the end. But it makes us feel like the story has come to a natural ending. Okay. Little Red Riding Hood has to come to Grandma's house after the wolf eats Grandma, right? Because we know that's going to bring the story full circle. If the story ended with the wolf meeting Little Red Riding Hood, having this meeting in the woods and then going to Grandma's house and eating her, we'd all feel really cheated, right? There's something missing. Little Red Riding Hood coming, being eaten, and of course then being saved gives us a feeling of conclusion. Okay? So, we've now talked about spontaneity, and we've talked about storytelling. Okay? And the truth is, storytelling and spontaneity are important whether you're doing a 30-second scene or you're doing a long form that takes an hour. Okay? Those work themselves into all improvisation, as does the next area, which is agreement. If there's one rule of improv, and there's lots of debate as to how many rules of improv there are, and we won't get into that discussion, but if there's one rule, it's the idea of the acceptance of offers. Okay? A quote from Keith is that yes doesn't mean yes, but it always means agreement. Okay? I have to accept the offer that's given. Another way to look at it is, how do we not kill stories? Okay, so if what we're trying to do is to tell a story, how can we keep that story moving? How can we not get in the way of the story? The best way to teach these, as is so true in a lot of life, is to teach what actually does kill a story. Right? Because when you teach what does kill a story, then people start to recognize those and they self-correct them. So I call it kind of the via negativa style of training, right? So I say no, 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 no until you get it right. But I do give them a couple of ways to label these things. Okay? So there's lots of ways of not agreeing, and we're going to go through all of these right now with the help of my trusty performers. Okay? All of these are ways of protecting ourselves in real life. They're really good defense mechanisms for getting through the day. They just don't work on stage. Blocking.
Will you take these cookies through the forest to Granny, please?
She's gone on vacation.
Like to come swimming with me?
No thanks.
Okay? And some improvisers will go so far as to block themselves.
Like to come swimming?
Sure, that'd be great.
Oh, I forgot the pool is empty.
Okay? Of course, people may laugh, as you all did, which unfortunately reinforces the behavior in people. We like to be laughed at, right? But it doesn't move the story along. Blocking just gets in our way. Not all negative answers, however, are blocking, and this is what plays into that yes doesn't always mean yes, but it does mean agreement. As an example,
You must be too tired to come up for coffee.
No, I'm fresh as a daisy.
okay? And so the story gets moved along by saying no, right? Being negative.
Will you take these cookies to Grandma's house in the woods?
She always nags me and she smells funny.
You know she can't help it.
And it's raining. The woods are dark.
Being negative kills your partner's ideas, and it means less of a transformation for the hero to be changed, right? If that's how the story of Little Red Riding Hood started, well, we wouldn't really be rooting for Little Red Riding Hood, would we? It gives our character, our hero, less of a journey. But being negative, but positive isn't always happy. It's always forward moving. Okay, so if we have a doctor and a patient relationship,
I'm afraid I've got some bad news. We saw something moving in your stomach.
Moving?
I'm afraid there's an alien in there.
Dun, dun, dun.
okay? So you can certainly be negative on stage, but it has to be forward moving. We can, of course, also win.
What is it?
I don't know.
So you have, what is it? And rather than my partner helping me out and telling me what it is, my partner says, I don't know either. And in so doing, our story goes nowhere. Right? It's accepting an offer. So he didn't say, what are you talking about? There's nothing there, right? Which would be blocking. He accepted it, but he didn't give me anything. He didn't help to move the story along. We win when there's an offer made that has infinite possibilities, and we're scared to make a definition. And we're scared to make a definition for a lot of different reasons, right? We're scared to make a definition because of that spontaneous thing that we talked about, that if I make a definition, you guys are going to think something about me, right? And I don't want you to think anything about me, so I'm just not going to define it, okay? Or I could be afraid that my partner has something in mind, and if I offer something else, he or she won't go along with it. Okay? So there's all different reasons why we win. But defining it helps move the story along. Okay? If I'm in an improv and I'm sitting and watching TV, and I don't define what it is I'm watching, that doesn't help me tell the story. Okay? Whereas if I simply define it, I'm watching a horror movie, well, that opens up all sorts of possibilities, right, for what could happen then in my scene. Right? Suddenly I hear a noise in the basement. Suddenly I see that the movie I'm watching is taking place in my living room, right? All sorts of potential things, right? Versus if I was watching the local news, right? And then all sorts of things could come out of that that wouldn't have come out of the horror story. But if I don't define it, I'm wimpy. Right? I'm not making a choice, and by not making a choice, I'm not moving my story along. Canceling.
Little Red Riding Hood meets the wolf and runs home. The end.
Excellent. Okay, so what canceling is, I'm offering something up. Ooh, here's a good potential. And then I'm immediately canceling it. Right? So I'm wrapping it all up. I don't have to make an offer. I light a fire. Did I get this to you? Yes.
Yep. But go.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna light a fire, and then the rain's gonna come and put it out.
I can use canceling effectively. It's something that we try to encourage new improvisers not to do, but it actually is a good way of ending a scene. If, for example, there's an old video of Pluto, and Pluto, Mickey's dog, he goes to the zoo, and he has a bone, and he sees a lion, and the lion has a really big bone. So he drops his bone, and he has all of these adventures trying to get the lion's big bone, and in the end, of course, it doesn't succeed, and he goes back and picks up his original bone. Right? So he, in essence, cancels everything that he's done, but it ties a nice bow on the story. So canceling actually can have some positive effects, but not if it's put in the wrong place, which it usually is when it's protecting us and making our story not move forward. Joining.
Would you like to look at some of my paintings?
I'm a painter too. I paint in exactly the same style. We should collaborate.
Okay? So I am agreeing, right? I'm not shooting down his idea. I'm not blocking it. In fact, I'm agreeing so much that we have nothing further to discuss, right? I'm having exactly the same reaction, exactly the same emotional response as my partner. It might seem like you're playing nicely, but it doesn't move the story along. Right? No one is being changed.
Great party last night, wasn't it?
Yeah, Brad is always throwing great parties.
Okay? Gossiping is talking about events or people that have already transpired who aren't present. Okay? You can use gossip to build a platform, which we've already talked about, that idea of building something so that you're building a relationship by gossiping. But if you keep it in the gossip realm, nothing's going to happen, right? And that, of course, protects us. If I'm talking about somebody and something that's already happened or that's not here, then I don't have to be emotionally changed, right? I can gossip in order to build a platform, but in order for it to be interesting, I have to bring it into the present. For example,
Great party last night, wasn't it?
Yeah, Brad is always throwing great parties.
He's my boyfriend.
Really? I slept with him.
okay? I did actually randomly assign these lines, so that was great. But that certainly takes what was gossip, moves it into the present, and we have a scene that I think all of us want to see how that plays out. We have agreed activities. These are physical gossip. Okay, so they're playing with cards, they're waltzing, they're folding laundry, they're jogging. Okay, again, it can be used to create setup, but it's only going to work if there's a break in the activity. Okay? If Brittany and I agree to waltz, someone had better step on someone's toes, okay? Or someone had better come in and tap her on the shoulder and say, I'm the only woman he's ever loved. Okay? Something had better happen to break that agreed activity. Bridging. Bridging is building unnecessary steps so that we don't have to get to the point where someone is changed. For example, if I got the suggestion, or my performers got the suggestion of a boss firing an employee, bridging might create this scene.
Come in, sit down. How long have you been working for us, Thomas?
6 years, sir.
Yes, well, in that time, you've racked up quite a few infractions, as I can see in your file.
Okay? Then he can continue talking for minutes upon minutes about what's in the file without ever actually firing Thomas, right? So he can bridge, he can keep giving himself little things that he can keep looking at and never actually have to get to the point. Instead of, or a more exciting scene for the same reference without bridging would be,
Come in, sit down. You're fired, Thomas.
Fired? What for, sir?
The stealing, Thomas. The office has no paper clips because of you.
what we want to see in a scene is somebody changed, right? We want, if we offer the suggestion, we want to see somebody fired, right? Or an employee firing, employer firing an employee. And darn it, we want to see that employee's reaction, right? Bridging keeps that from happening for us. So we want to get rid of bridging. Hedging. Hedging is like bridging, but rather than postponing a good idea, we're just going to waffle, hoping that one's going to come up for us later.
What are you going to say to him when you see him?
I don't know. I'll think about it.
Okay? Instead of, this is what I'm going to say to him. Oh no, but if I say, this is what I'm going to say to him, I'm not on the spot to actually come up with something to say to him, right? Which is scary. So we push that decision off into the future, and in so doing, we don't tell the story. Hedging. Sidetracking. Sidetracking, or also known as confusing. Two hunters are on a hunt for the great moose. And they stop at a restaurant, and they get a cup of coffee. We as the audience don't want to see them stop for a cup of coffee, right? What we want is for them to have an interaction with the moose. I mean, that's why they're hunting for the moose. It can be used, if the improvisers are clever, to shelve material and then reincorporate it later. Okay? So if the owner of the diner comes in, serves them coffee, and tells them that there's a curse on anyone who hunts the mysterious moose, right? Then we know why they went to the coffee shop. Right? There's a reason. That makes sense. If, however, they just go in, they get a cup of coffee, they sit there and have some gossip, and then they leave, we feel cheated, right? Because the story isn't moving, it was a sidetrack tangent. Being original.
Little Red Riding Hood leaves the house to head for Grandma's house.
And gets hit by a ton of wet spaghetti noodles.
Okay? Being original is sidetracking that usually comes out of an improviser's desire to be thought clever. Okay? One of the first rules, and something we haven't talked about in Keith Johnston Improvisation, is he asks you, please don't be clever. Don't be original. Be as boring as you possibly can be. Okay? Because the truth is that that's what the audience wants. Okay? We want you to live within the world that has been created. Within that world, there's all sorts of flexibility. Okay? But being original isn't trying to move the story forward. It's trying to look as if I'm clever all by myself. And there really isn't a world for being clever all by myself in good improvisation. Our goal is to work together to tell a story that fits into the world that we've created. And of course, my not clever self, my boring self, is infinitely different than any of these 4 people sitting up here, right? Which is why we improvise together. Because I bring my own unoriginal, boring self. They bring their own unoriginal, boring selves, and we actually get some pretty interesting ideas happening. But being original just derails our story. And what it ends up doing is it means that we, usually the other improvisers who are on stage with this oh-so-clever person, have to do a whole lot of justifying to make their suggestions fit that really shouldn't, that don't serve the story. Looping.
Little Red Riding Hood picked some violets for Grandma, and some roses, and some daffodils. And then she found some berries and picked those.
Okay? It's a way of, again, delaying anything happening. Right? If I just keep naming off things that she did, I don't ever actually have to get to the story. Gagging. Okay, so the setup. A young couple is forced to drive to the middle of nowhere by a hitchhiker and dig their own graves. Okay? But rather than allowing them to experience what's happening to them, begging for their lives, saying their goodbyes, okay, and what would make a really interesting scene for us as an audience, they make jokes. Whoa, what a grave situation! Oh, what a fun time to be doing gardening! They're comic one-liners. This plays into your stand-up. They put them in to get a laugh, which they usually do, but it also protects them. It protects the improviser from actually having to be changed. So really, most gagging is just a protective mechanism so that I don't have to go with the story, so I don't have to see where it ends. Instant stakes. Instant trouble is what it should say. Instant trouble. 2 roommates on a Saturday.
I hate that you are always leaving your socks in the living room.
Shut up, you cow.
Pick up your stupid socks.
Okay? So we don't build a platform. If we just gave them, that's your suggestion, 2 roommates on a Sunday. Okay? Ideally, they want to build a platform. They want to build some sort of stasis and then introduce the trouble. If you introduce the trouble, and particularly if you start negative, you've got no place to go. Okay? Then the story just has to keep getting ratcheted up, and the audience doesn't like to watch confrontation for the entire scene. So we want to build a positive platform and then introduce the chaos, or then introduce the conflict. It makes for a more interesting scene. And finally, lowering the stakes. Lowering the stakes minimizes trouble.
What seems to be the trouble?
It's my finger. It hurts a little.
Versus,
What seems to be the trouble?
It's my abdomen. I feel like something is scratching my insides.
Or
We're interviewing a lot of candidates for this job.
Oh, that's okay. I've been interviewed for 3 times this week.
versus
We're interviewing a lot of candidates for this job.
I really need this job. I haven't eaten in 3 days. I'll do anything.
Again, lowering the stakes means we have to be less changed. Right? So of course the opposite of that is raising the stakes, meaning we're going to be incredibly changed. And audiences like to watch people be incredibly changed. Right? We like to watch people who are uncomfortable. Because then we can say, phew, that's not me. Okay? So all of these Okay, all of these are ways that we block. They're ways that we keep the story from moving. And as I've said, they're all very effective for us in our common everyday lives. Right? If my boss calls me in and says, please don't let this happen, Jenna, you're fired, okay? I don't want to pick up all of her stuff and throw it out the window. Right? That might get me into more trouble. Possibly. I am going to, I've been conditioned to remain calm and to not let her see how much this negatively affects me. That's really boring to watch. We don't want to watch that, right? So we want, as improvisers, to allow ourselves to be changed. If we can get past all of these blocks and into storytelling, our audience will come back again and again, because we love seeing stories played out. As Johnstone says, if improv is not based on storytelling, the best players will get bored and drift away, and the spectators will say, very amusing, dear. Where shall we go next week? So what we've covered so far, we've covered spontaneity, we've covered storytelling, and we've covered agreement. That leaves us one huge area that is really specific to Johnstone. Not that other people don't do it, but that he has kind of made a science of the study of status. Status I get really excited about, as my students can tell you, because it's where sociology meets improvisation. We all play 101 statuses a day. Status is fluid. Okay? The way that I interact with my husband is different than the way I interact with my colleagues, is different than the way I interact with my students. Okay? We're all playing a status game right now. I'm standing, I'm talking, I have high status. You are sitting, you're listening, you have lower status. Right? Of course, we could leave this room and probably, for a lot of us, that status is going to reverse. Right? And suddenly I'll be low status and you guys will be the ones in charge. Okay? We play it 100 times a day and we're experts at status. All of us are. What we can do is to use that status on stage to tell quick stories about people. Okay? So what I'm going to need is 2 of you. Doesn't matter which 2. Excellent. Come on up right into the center. You can bring chairs, yes. Okay. And I'm going to ask you to stretch your imaginations just a little bit. And I'm going to give you exactly 1 minute. I'm going to give you exactly 1 minute to play a first date scene for us. Okay, so you're on your first date, and just a nice, neutral first date, and I'll tell you exactly when time is up. Off you go.
So, what do you do?
I'm a student.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, what do you do?
Oh, I'm a student too.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool. Have you ever been here before?
No, actually I haven't. Have you been here?
Yeah, the spaghetti, awesome.
Oh, yeah, I was looking at it.
Yeah. Do you eat meat?
Not usually.
No.
No.
Oh.
Do you?
I was gonna ask you if I could have your meatballs.
Well, that would be perfect, because usually I just, push them off to the side and
Oh, this is gonna work out great, I think.
I think so too.
Do you drink?
Sometimes, yeah.
Oh,
Water, lemonade,
Oh. Do you drink alcohol?
Yeah, sometimes.
Like-
Do you drink alcohol?
Oh, every day.
Okay, good. Okay, so 1 minute, a nicely amusing scene, right? But you could feel that there was some, I don't know where this is going, right? We don't know who these people are. So now I'm going to ask you, you're going to play the same 1 minute for us after you follow these brief instructions, right, about physicality. So I'm going to ask you first to bring your whole body to the front of your chair so that you're perched right on the very edge. Okay. Then you're gonna turn your toes in slightly, so they point towards one another. You're gonna let your shoulders hunch forward some. You're gonna stick your chin out, and you're gonna tuck your head kind of back into your shoulders. Okay. You're gonna try a little smile, but you're gonna let your top teeth cover your lower lip. Now you can try a goofy giggle that goes along with the smile. Okay. You're going to periodically allow your hands to drift towards your face to adjust things. Okay, so they can scratch your nose or fiddle with your hair or push your glasses up, but those hands just keep coming up to your face. And finally, you're going to try to make eye contact with the other person, but if you actually make eye contact with them, you're going to have to giggle and look away. Okay, and let's go ahead and play the same scene once again.
So, what do you do?
I'm a student.
Oh, cool.
What do you do?
I'm a student too. Cool. Have you ever been here before?
No. Have you?
Yeah. I like spaghetti.
I thought it looked good.
Do you eat meat? Can I have your meatballs?
Yeah. Usually I just push them to the side.
Do you drink?
Sometimes. Water and stuff.
I meant alcohol.
Yeah, sometimes.
I drink every day.
Okay, good. And I'm going to ask you to do it one more time. This time, go ahead and let go of all of the twitching and the flicking and the touching of your face and the smiling with your teeth out and the giggling. Okay? And I want you to concentrate just on two things. Okay? On first, find it easy to make eye contact with the other person. In fact, try not to look away, especially when you're speaking. And second, don't move your head while you're speaking. Okay, so you can move your head the rest of the time, but when you speak, try to keep it as still as possible. Same scene.
So, what do you do?
I'm a student. What do you do?
I'm a student too. before?
Have you ever been here before?
Yes, I like the spaghetti.
I was wondering what was good.
Do you eat meat?
Sometimes. No.
Can I have your meatballs?
Yes. I usually push them to the side.
Do you drink?
Yeah. Water, lemonade.
Do you drink alcohol?
Yes. Do you?
Every day.
Right, so status, as we saw, the first example being kind of our extreme of low status, right? And the second example being our extreme of high status, instantly creates characters, right? Status has nothing to do with who the person is. Okay? A president can be low status and a janitor can be high status. It has nothing to do with occupation. It has to do with the way that they interact with another person. It has to do with behavior and with attitudes. And all drama is about status changes. Okay? We want to see a character change status. In tragedy, a high character falls. Right? I mean, that's part of the definition of a true tragedy. In comedy, the low character is going to climb in status. Right? It's why we all root for Charlie Chaplin. Right? Because he's the epitome of the low status guy who's trying to climb up in status. There are ways that we can manipulate status, and the exciting thing about status is that just by changing the way we sit, right, or whether we make eye contact or not, it instantly creates a character. And that's exciting. It's much more exciting to watch characters on stage than it is to watch us as actors on stage. You're going to get really bored if you just see Jenna and Brittany and Becca and Chris and Matt over and over again. Right? But if we can just take these little ideas about status and start putting them together, we have all sorts of characters at our fingertips. And there's easy ways to manipulate status to make comedy. Two of the ones that Johnston spends a lot of time with are the idea of status transitions and status swaps. Status transitions being where I start high and I end up low, and you start low and you end up high. Okay, and we like to see that. Or status swaps, where we take what's expected and then we reverse it. Okay, so we've all seen a high status cop pull over a low status person to receive a ticket. Okay, it's what most of us play out when we get pulled over. It's much more interesting or more fun to see a low status cop try to give a high status person a ticket. Right? I mean, that can result in some really fun comedy. So status is one of those things that you can spend lots of time studying. And of course, it's easy to play very high and very low status, but it's also really interesting to play games where we try to come just one step above, or just one step below, right? Where we try to match one another's status, which is impossible to do. One person always is higher status, and it's a constant jiggle that we do. But there's lots of ways to play with status on stage, which is really exciting for the improviser. And so what we've covered this evening are four areas that I think are crucial when we're talking about Johnstone's theories of improv. The idea of spontaneity, of getting out of your own way so that you can create. So it's not coming up with something, but just letting what already lives inside of you come out. It's storytelling. It's that idea that good stories have a platform or stasis, a problem, and then reincorporation that ties it all up for us at the end. Agreement that there's all sorts of ways to get in the way of a story, but what we ultimately want to do is to tell the story. And finally, status, and that idea of the fact that just by tweaking how we relate to one another, we can make really interesting character choices. Of course, there are other elements to successful improv. The first, and probably the most crucial, is trust in the people who you're improvising with. Right? And that is the #1 reason why we practice improv. Of course, all of these other things truly are somewhat intuitive. I mean, it's great to read books on it and great to have all of this academic knowledge about it, but most of these other things will work their way out if you just get together to the point where you really trust. I trust that when I step up on stage with these 4, they're going to have my back and I'm going to have theirs. So it's why we get together multiple times a week to do just that and practice. And of course, the final and most crucial piece is having a willing audience. Right? We can make ourselves laugh all day long, which I tell you is the best part about teaching improv. I never leave improv class feeling worse than when I went in. But ultimately, right, we want a willing audience to share the work that we've done. So, gratuitous plug. Our improv troupe, these 4 folks, and a lot of the folks actually out here in the audience as well, are performing 2 times coming up here fairly soon. We're performing on Saturday, April 16th at 8 p.m. here in the Experimental Theater. And then, if any of you want a road trip, we're going to be performing the next weekend, Saturday, April 23rd, at the Youth Theater up in Saguache. So please come out and support these students who are playing, and me too, in terms of our improv troupe. Thank you very much. Do you guys have any questions about either our improv troupe or about improv training or? I covered everything.
What sort of format do you guys have?
We actually have been experimenting with both long form and short form, which, do those mean anything to you? Okay, good, excellent. Okay, basically short form, for those of you who don't know, are the kind of all-contained games that you see on programs like Whose Line Is It Anyway? Long form is where you build scenes that incorporate one another, where they grow out of one another. So what we have been doing and what we're going to do on the 2 performances in April is do 2 acts, an act of short form and an act of long form. It kind of gives us the ability to play with both and hone our skills at both of them. Yes?
What would be an example of someone else's theory and how would that be different from this phase?
Improvisers are really catty people. They really are. There's Del Close, who ran, he has since passed away, but he ran the Second City in Chicago, and from all accounts, he and Keith Johnston could not stand one another, couldn't really be in the same room with one another, and a lot of Keith Johnston's work relies upon having a director, a third eye, that kind of helps to shape what's going on in front of the audience, which Del Close thought was garbage. And he wanted the improvisers to play completely self-contained. Almost all of Keith Johnston's work is short form. So it's the self-contained games that have competing teams playing against one another. Del Close and the Second City are all about long form. They actually have very little focus on short form games. They think that the true art of improv is that idea of taking a story and connecting it with another story and connecting it with another story. So that's just one way in which they're different. The beautiful thing about being an improv teacher or leader is that I get to take pieces from all of them. And I say, this is good, but I don't like this, and I like this. So we do both. We do both long form and short form.
You said when you were talking about trust in your group, that you know that they have your back and you have theirs. By that, do you mean that if one of you slips up and does one of those showstoppers, and someone else can recognize it and kind of pick it
Yeah,
up and fix it?
absolutely, absolutely. And the idea that if I step in and I make an offer, that offer is going to be accepted, right? So that if I make an offer, they're not going to do one of those things that we talked about tonight. You know, I'm not going to say, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, and she says,
Not my birthday.
right? And then where do I go? Oh no, I just made an offer and I feel really stupid, and it makes my self-confidence go, right? And the next time we get up on stage, I'm going to be a whole lot more hesitant, right, to make an offer to Brittany. Whereas if I bring her birthday cake and she accepts it, you know, now she can burst into tears. You know, she can say, how dare you bring up my birthday, right? That's shooting down my my gift to her, but it's not shooting down my offer, right? And that's that difference between yes and agreement. She doesn't have to say, oh my God, it's a beautiful cake, right? But she does have to accept my offer. And that's all it is, right? It's building that trust, that belief that when I offer, something's going to be reciprocated.
Have you ever taken these principles and applied them, say, for instance, in management?
You know what, there's a lot of that. And Johnstone himself actually does a lot of corporate trainings.
Okay.
And in fact, improv does translate perfectly well into the business world. There's a book out that's called Improv Wisdom. And it's written, I can't remember the name of the woman who wrote it, but she has taught improv for years and years and years, and took the lessons that she learned from improv and has applied them to life in general. But absolutely, it applies, a huge amount of it applies to business and corporate world.
Improv wisdom.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you all so much for being here.
Adams State College. Great stories begin here.